Welcome to the second installment of our three-part series of busting cognitive psychology myths. In the last episode, we focused on busting the myth that neurodiverse individuals are not able to focus for extended periods of time. In this episode, we will focus on tackling the myth about screen time in early childhood being a cause for children being diagnosed with ADHD. It is important to understand where this myth came from and why people believe that ADHD is caused by screen time at an early age.
According to Engelhard and Collins, 2019, individuals with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder may be unusually sensitive to screen media technology, SMT, from television to mobile devices, which may be indicative of a link between ADHD and screen use. While this is speculative, it was also found that the vast majority of findings linking SMT to ADHD have been derived from cross-sectional studies, leading to uncertainty about cause versus effect. While we are unsure about direct links, there is still the possibility that ADHD can be linked to screen time. Furthermore, another 2019 study found that increased screen time in preschool is associated with worse inattention problems, which supports the notion that screen time may lead to ADHD-like symptoms. Furthermore, there are subdiagnoses of ADHD, inattentive and hyperactive. Intentional ADHD very well could be linked to screen time, especially since children were found to have potential problems and non-hyperactive problems, but we need further research to disprove it.
We conducted a poll through our Instagram accounts to see what the general population would say when faced with the myth. Screen time in early childhood causes ADHD. The results stated that 27.4% of 73 participants answered that the myth was true. In an article, Early Life Predictors of Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder Symptomatology Profiles from Early through Middle Childhood by Michael Willoughby, Jason Williams, Roger Mills-Cons, and Clancy Blair, they tackled the main reasons why children have been diagnosed with ADHD before the age of 12. They start by discussing that early life risk factors begin in the womb during postnatal period and the early postnatal period. These factors are important to identify because they are linked with genetic factors along with disruptive to their cognitive development at an early age. Later in the article, the authors discuss the evidence that socioeconomic risk factors play a role in children who get diagnosed. Such factors that are discussed fall into two categories: macro-environmental experiences, which is school quality, neighborhood influences, and safety, and micro-environmental experiences, household chaos, caregivers, and in-home environments. With parents who are in lower socioeconomic backgrounds, it is common for them to put screens on to entertain the children while they cook, clean, and work. This creates an environment where there is a large lack in parent involvement, which is attributed to children having ADHD. In another article, What Causes Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder by Anita Thapar, Miriam Cooper, and Rachel Jeffries, they broke down the major factors that play into a child being diagnosed with ADHD. They discussed how there were two main categories of risk factors: genetic and environmental. Looking at these two articles, we can see that there are 6 major early risk factors of ADHD: genetics, pregnancy complications, toxins and diet of both mother and child later in life, macro-environmental experiences, micro-environmental experiences, and negative relationships with family and peers. Looking within these different risk factors, it is easy to see where screen time could be attributed to ADHD as a young child.
To dispel the ideology that screen time in early childhood causes ADHD, it's important to remember what is wrong with and about this myth.
A 2007 study determined that ADHD is primarily developed as a result of genetic predispositions rather than environmental factors. This study did recognize that some environmental factors may affect the likelihood of developing ADHD, however screen time was not one of those factors. As a bit of a personal anecdote, you'd think that as 2000s kids would all have had ADHD if this myth were true. Even though many of us born in the earlier 2000s still weren't raised with iPads in our hands, perhaps like some of our younger siblings or cousins were, we still had our fair share of screen time. I think we can all agree that focusing in online classes can really be a struggle, but perhaps that doesn't mean we all have ADHD. Besides, in a hypothetical situation, and if enough of the population were diagnosed with something like ADHD, like this myth would suggest, it would become the norm and wouldn't require diagnosis at all. The few studies that have found any significant results suggesting that screen time can cause symptoms of ADHD, or in most cases only worsen already present symptoms, all have glaring validity errors, some of which including not accounting for family history of ADHD symptoms or parenting styles. For example, using parenting styles that are not ideal for the given child, causing them to be more susceptible to maladaptive behaviors. Similarly to what Ari talked about earlier, what could be mistaken for screen time causing symptoms of ADHD has not been adequately proven to be a causal relationship. It's merely a misunderstood correlation. These results were further confirmed by another study in 2018 that was specifically researching this very question. Even the Center for Disease Control maintains that research does not support the popularly held view that ADHD is caused by eating too much sugar, watching too much television, parenting, or social and environmental factors such as poverty or family chaos.
Since a rather large amount, 27.4% of our poll audience believes that this myth of screen time in early childhood causing ADHD is true, I want to dissect the correct ways to think about this myth and some efficient methods to dispelling its faux credibility. So despite the truths and background information that was previously discussed, the myth is ultimately false. Though external factors correlate with the diagnosis of ADHD, the statistical relations do not imply that external factors cause ADHD. There are obstacles that need to be avoided just so in order to show the harm of misinformation, and these pitfalls are caused by the harm of believing and following this myth as well as other psychological myths in general, and over time this can be detrimental to people. For example, like threats to self-esteem, economic cost, wasted money on opportunities you might think you need but you don't actually, and then behavioral limitations framed around certain beliefs or limitation of actions or experiences. And if you are wondering about what caused you or someone you know to be diagnosed with ADHD, take note and or ask yourself these questions as you gather information. Just make sure to pay extra attention to detail, argue for facts and sources, question ideologies and the facts behind research, seek evidence to support your beliefs, process new information with a reasoned argumentation, and verify your knowledge based on remembered experiences and shared reminiscences, which can be easily misconstrued. And these core cognitive capabilities that we use nearly every day of our adult lives are an important component to dispelling a myth such as this one. The steps necessary to take to dispelling myths is discussed at length in the article Making the Truth Stick and Myths Fade, Lessons from Cognitive Psychology. According to current available research, it's understood that information is more likely to stick more easily it can be processed and feel familiar. And from this, we can conclude that an efficient method, as mentioned in the article, is repetition. Specifically, a repetition of correct information, in this case regarding ADHD and screen time. It's usually better to ignore false information than to adjust it or repeat a version of it that's supposed to be more of the truth than the original statement. So basically, overall, pay more attention to the truth than of the myth. Focus rather on the facts and making them easy to understand and easy to remember. The second strategy is to remember that true information needs to be made very accessible, so out-resource misinformation. Perhaps when learning about ADHD and screen time, you would seek facts in a place that true information is widely accessible. And lastly, one of the most powerful strategies for avoiding misinformation is to prepare, understand, and know when it's coming. To help others avoid misinformation and to dispel myths, be sure to provide accurate details and present an alternative perspective that prepares them for that possibility. Clarify any false accounts to increase their chances of remembering the true information and allow the false details to fade away. And this can also be done by warning others before they absorb the misinformation. And when done accurately, these strategies can dispel myths surrounding cognition. In this case, the belief that screen time in early childhood causes ADHD.